Hi, everyone. So I'm really thrilled about this panel because this is a really accomplished group of people that have been really actively moving our industry forward in many different unique ways. And also, they're all Chainlink users, which is really great. So I'm thrilled to be here with them and to chat through their views on really more than anything how to move the industry forward. But they'll do a better job introducing themselves than me, so Chuck, please go ahead.
Sure. So great to be here. My name is Chuck Mounts. I'm the Chief DeFi Officer at S&P Global. That's a role and a team that was created about 3.5 years ago with the express purpose to take our historical expertise in data analytics and benchmarks and create the products and services that are relevant for digital asset markets. So the first product we launched in the space from a risk assessment perspective was the stablecoin stability assessment. We launched that about a year and a half ago, and that is measuring the risk of a stablecoin depegging on its one-to-one mark against a fiat currency. And we've recently had very exciting news about that. And another first for us, we just, with Chainlink, brought our SSAs on chain. And that was a very exciting development for us to bring our analytic capabilities and benchmarking capabilities on chain for the first time.
So I'm Doney, and I have a problem. I don't have the cool title that Chuck has. I like the Chief DeFi Officer. That's much cooler than mine. I am the Chief Technology Officer at DTCC Digital Assets. We're working to tokenize. DTCC is the CSD for the US financial markets, the Central Securities Depository. We're responsible for the record keeping of $100 trillion worth of assets, and we do roughly $4 quadrillion in transactions on a yearly basis. We're working to bring this onto blockchain rails, and we've got an aggressive target to tokenize our inventory, and then to produce really useful things that you can do with the tokens once they're in that form. The center of this is something called a conversion service that allows people to take their assets in traditional books and records, so your shares of Apple and Microsoft, convert them to token form on the ledger of your choice so that you can use them with the protocols that exist there. And we're introducing a bunch of institutional financial tools. For example, collateral management, securities lending, repo markets. And here we're using Chainlink and their data services in order to have real-time pricing, haircut models, rate services, et cetera, so that these collateral processes come alive, and it allows for real-time collateral mobility.
Yeah, sorry, sound folks, there's a bit of echo on Dan's microphone. Could you please fix that immediately? Thank you. Please, Lawrence, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, a fantastic group. I think this is exactly we have everybody here to do the next $1 trillion of tokenization. So thanks a lot for having me here. So I'm Lawrence. I'm leading UBS Tokenize, the in-house tokenization service for UBS. We are a global wealth manager, investment bank, asset manager, and personal and corporate banking. And I work with all the different business divisions, looking at what type of use cases can we find, help them to bring the use cases to life. We started in 2023 with structured notes, taking advantage of the Swiss DLT law, so create them really natively directly on the blockchain. We do it on Ethereum. And then last year we launched UMINT, our money market fund in Singapore, also on Ethereum and on the same platform. And now we're really focused and excited to build that product out as well with Chainlink, where we just announced this morning the first live transaction for the digital transfer agency standard supported by Chainlink. So I think we're getting into a very, very exciting year and adoption for tokenization now.
Yeah, it's definitely going to the next level, I think, for our industry as a whole. And I agree with you, Lorenz. Like, these are the key organizations, yours, the DTCC, the S&P, that if they get behind tokenization in a real way, then I agree with you. Literally, just these three organizations going full steam into tokenization could make it happen in a big way for our industry, which is very exciting. So this panel is really about interoperability, and I wanted to think with you folks about how you view interoperability. Why is interoperability important for chains? Why do these chains need to get connected to each other at all? And how do you view the different risks of interoperability and how you're going to think through those and how you're going to work through those risks? So Chuck, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, you're talking our language when you talk about risks and assessing the risks. So I think that the move on-chain introduces a myriad of new types of risk, both idiosyncratic risk and market structure and kind of systemic risk. And so what we look to do is bring our capabilities to help stakeholders navigate the risk landscape to make informed decisions on how they want to kind of position in that risk landscape, but also how to think about pricing risk. And so as an independent third-party provider of risk assessments, I think we can fulfill that role in the marketplace in this digital landscape that we also do in traditional markets, with the ultimate objective, and kind of going back to the theme of interoperability, I think one of the core promises from my seat is that blockchain capabilities and the development of a digital asset ecosystem will ultimately serve to reduce liquidity silos, so enhance liquidity and ultimately lower the cost of capital for all market participants. And I think that the people up here, we're all integral to ensuring that that's the direction of markets and that we together can achieve that optimal outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think all of these new on-chain operations carry their own set of risks and benefits, and those risks need to get managed. And I imagine you folks at S&P are definitely thinking about how to assess those and how to describe them and manage looking at them in an efficient way. So it's a super interesting topic.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we also strive to do is, we're the world's largest rating agency. We are also the world's largest index provider, so you may have heard of the S&P 500 as an example. So we have an ability to bring our benchmarks into the ecosystem that allows people to understand different levels of risk and to navigate and compare risk points between different operating systems or different asset classes that, once again, inform decision-making and facilitate the pricing of risk.
Yeah. Dan, how do you view the need for interoperability and the risks that it could create?
So our vision is to move the world, the US markets, from a T+1 settlement structure to a T0 settlement structure. So this past year, we moved from T2, trades that settle 2 days later, to T1. It was a large achievement for the US markets, but we're not done. We have to get to T0. In order to handle T0, what that means is the disposition of all transactions, all trades, all movement of value in any form can be settled on rails in near real time. That means all financial transactions, the target is for all financial transactions to happen on blockchain rails. To do that, the transaction volume we estimate is somewhere around 1 million transactions per second. The reality of blockchain networks is a single blockchain network cannot scale to 1 million transactions per second. You have the trilemma, you have a physics problem. But you can do a chain of chains. So what we know in the long run is there will be many chains. That's always going to be true, which introduces the interoperability challenge. If there are many chains, how do you move value and data between those chains such that you can have efficient transactions? If you're not able to make this movement freely between the chains, you're really left with the same world that we had before, which was one that scales out and handles all of these transactions through various disparate systems that are not connected together and not interoperable. We need to do better. We know we can do better, but it really centers around the kinds of technologies like Chainlink has showed today that allow us to move data and value freely between the network of chains that we know is already developing. Almost on a daily basis, you see new chains coming into the market.
Lawrence?
Yeah, I think I come a bit from two viewpoints. One is the manufacturer of tokenized products, right? And there we're interested in having, aggregated liquidity. And if everybody, we see there's sometimes different purposes why you want to have different networks. But if you want to have the asset, ideally you have the asset and the cash lag on the same place, right? But for different reasons, that's not going to be the reality, right? And I think interoperability is not just interoperability between different networks, it's interoperability between traditional systems and the new networks. Because that's where all the liquidity is, right? And I think that's where we have to look, how can we bring this together, right? That we can take the advantages, that we can start building, more and more on the blockchain, take advantage of what we have from the capabilities there, but also bring the liquidity from the traditional systems there. I think that's the biggest interoperability which we need to, do well over the next couple of years. And I also like the point, right, from Chuck. I think S&P always had like a quite forward-looking view on what does it mean to tokenize. Well, we tokenize securities. It's still a security, right? That doesn't change. But you have tech risk. You have maybe a legal framework which you have to do due diligence. That's the second point of view. We look at, well, we're the largest wealth manager, so what we look at if we have a tokenized product to bring it in, right? And I think, how can we bring the same trust and security levels, and they have to be super high when you go into securities markets, right? It's like crypto market has been performing well, but it's still, 2-3 trillion, and we're talking about, 250 trillion markets moving in that direction. So I think we have to have the right capabilities in place to make that work.
Yeah, those are all really astute points from all of you. I think we're definitely going to end up in a world where there's a lot of chains, there's a lot of liquidity in all the different chains. The chains need to interoperate with each other. I think it's a really interesting point, Lorenz, that you see the cash, I'm guessing the cash lag happening in off-chain systems in relation to on-chain assets, right? So, that's definitely something that we've been building towards together with Swift, together with others, about how does the cash lag and all that liquidity that exists off-chain still interact with the on-chain world in a meaningful way. And then as stablecoins become more prevalent and as this collateral management is better and better, I think you'll have more and more on-chain form of payments as well. But I think it's definitely a problem that needs to be solved. My personal view is that, and Chuck, feel free to tell me what your how you feel about this, because it's more or less of a risk thing. Is there will be different ways of bridging, there will be different ways of tokenizing, there will be different ways of proving things about assets through things like proof of reserves or something, and the systems, or sorry, not the systems, but the assets or the smart contracts that have less proof, or have a less reliable bridge, or have less information about the underlying assets wherever they are, will probably, from your point of view, be seen as more risky, right? They'll be scored against those risks. The bridging risk, the proof of reserves risk that you could over-mint because there is no proof of reserves. These things seem to me like obvious kind of risk considerations. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things that we've stated internally as we kind of build capabilities out is that a lot of the existing risks from traditional markets will remain. Like credit risk is credit risk no matter how credit risk is intermediated across markets. But there are going to be some risks that are diminished. For instance, say counterparty risk. When you go to live transactions and not T+2 or T+3 or whatever, and you take intermediaries out, so you have some reduction in transaction risk and some reduction in counterparty risk. But then you have introduction of entirely new forms of risk. It could be smart contract risk, it could be bridging risk. It could take a lot of different forms, and what's really critical is that a party like us, a trusted third-party provider, have the tools and capabilities to provide a holistic view of the risk, whether it's idiosyncratic risk that may stem from an individual player or an individual structure, to systemic risks that are going to develop as this ecosystem evolves, and as, for instance, stablecoins become maybe the largest buyers of US Treasuries. So there are a lot of systemic risks that will come with the growth of stablecoins and that shift in markets. So we're taking a very wide lens at how we look at that the pathway of change for risk, including like when you think about like operating in like cyber risk. Cyber risk in a Web 2 world is quite different from cyber risk in a Web 3 world. And like having a solid understanding of what cyber risk from a Web 2 concept, cyber risk, what it means in a Web 3 world where those kind of risks are integrated into the very fabric of the product and the market ecosystem is something that firms like us and all stakeholders are going to have to get our head around.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think personally, whatever the most reliable bridging system, the most reliable proving system, data system, whatever that is going to be the one that ends up allowing the creation of the best assets or ascribing the least additional risk to an asset that passes through a system, right? And so that's kind of what we're building towards in the Chainlink standards and what we're building towards with Chainlink in general. So I think that's what adds up from my point of view. But I think we should also discuss the importance of standards, because standards are really a critical aspect, I think, of what makes markets efficient and what makes innovation happen and what makes building of new things happen, is that you can efficiently build against the set of conditions that others will also adopt. And so if you're on a certain standard, you know that they will adopt it and you'll have a customer base that wants to deal with you against that standard. And so Dan has a ton of experience with standards, and so it'd be thrilling to hear your views in addition to others, but let's please start with you. What are your thoughts on standards, their importance, and how you think they'll develop in our industry?
So the importance of standards can really be seen most clearly in the success of ERC20. The reason we're all here as a baseline is because there is a simple standard that represents a unit of value where you can easily transact one wallet to another and understand your balance, that is the total number of those units that you hold and operate in a super straightforward way. You can download any wallet, access any wallet provider, and it knows how to move that value. There's another standard, ERC 165, where I can look at a smart contract and it will tell me what functions it supports. So I know as one smart contract whether I can interact with another smart contract. The piece that's been missing is the data standard component. So we can understand the functions of a smart contract, but not what it means. So this is a new element, but we expect it to have the same unlocking value in terms of smart contract automation that ERC20 has had. For example, let's say S&P does a rating on a financial instrument, and in my smart contract, I want to use S&P's rating to determine if it's collateral eligible. How do I know that it was S&P who set that rating? How do I know what the possible values are? How do I know that that data's been represented in the proper format? We've developed a mechanism that allows for a decentralized database where parties are able to set standards. S&P can own their own rating. Just as an example, there might be a property called maturity date. How do you know whether it's in European format date or US format date? If you can agree on that model, if you have the property itself has its own smart contract address, we know that when we say maturity date, we mean the same thing. That allows smart contracts to reason over those objects, and this allows anything from collateral mobility to automated compliance from the previous channel. So these are big unlocks, and they're all driven by the fact that we can have reliable meaning on a central database. We work this with Chainlink on Project Calm, on corporate actions. Corporate actions, for those who aren't super familiar with the discipline, it's the connection between an issuer of an asset, that's a company, and its ultimate holders. It goes from the issuer to the transfer agent to the CSD to the custodial broker to the broker-dealer to maybe an RIA to the end user. All of those are physical systems that have to agree. There's lots of errors, enormous costs associated with that model. By introducing a common data standard, you can introduce, as we showed together with Chainlink, a model where you can fully automate those corporate actions. And that's an exciting development. There's a lot more in terms of financial processes through the use of data standards.
I think you're absolutely right. Sorry, I'm just adding more time. It's our panel, so I'm just gonna add more time. It's my conference, so I get to do that. That's what I was doing. But I generally agree with every single word Dan says. I don't even really need to hear them, but I completely agree. Lorenz, how do you view standards? What are your thoughts about them? As I guess I would say I would view you as a consumer of standards. So how would you view those?
Yeah, we are a consumer, and actually we're interested that there is a broad adoption of standards, right? One of the points why we decided to go into the tokenization journey, well, what we really liked is the open source standard, right? We use a public blockchain because it's an open source standard where everybody can bring their own capabilities, and you avoid to have custom integrations. Because then all your network effects fall away. It actually builds quite a lot of independent risk if you have to manage like unstandardized different connections. So from the beginning, we went for an open source standard as well for our smart contract. So we're using the CMT-AT, it's an ERC20 based one plus, right? Because we're doing security, so you have some add-ons there, and they have different modules as well for, you know, if it's a debt security, you have certain standards there. So I think that's really how we started it. And now if we say we bring more and more logic from the assets on chain, again, we need standards because we want as broad as a community to be able to custody it, process it, etc. And again, if we just say, yes, we just setting whatever we'd like, whatever works best, well, next door it's not gonna work like that anymore, right? And that's what we want to avoid. So we have been always interested to work with the industry, and I think the digital transfer agent standard is again the same thing, right? I think that's what we like. It's a utility for our fund, but it's something which is a standard, so it's easy to integrate and it's composable with the existing ecosystem, and avoids, you know, trying to, you know, make the best working thingy, but just for one niche application, right? And much more, it's a broader one. And I think that's really then the utility which you get if you tokenize, because yeah, it's a standard, and you know, everybody who can custody an ERC20 token can, for example, custody the tokens for our human, right? And now the same should be happening for any processing, any data. Standardizing data in finance has been a long discussion, is nothing new. But you know, bringing that now on chain, how does an event look, etc., that should absolutely be standardized, and we should, you know, be able to rely then from a risk perspective also on that. So I think that's another important thing, is especially if we look now from a distribution perspective, if you have to start doing due diligence on every single asset and all the different events and how we should like integrate our own systems with it, if we don't have standards, we're just not going to get anywhere, right? It's too much risk. It would be too much effort to actually be able to give access to the assets and services from which are blockchain based now.
Yeah, so it seems to me like you have problems around, you know, the servicing, the processing of transactions, the ability for transactions to work for these tokenized funds, and you fundamentally don't want to solve them. Like, you don't want to be the ones who have to figure out how, you know, transfer agency works on chain, or data works on chain, or these other things work on chain. And that absolutely makes sense to me, because in the traditional world, those aren't problems you need to solve, right? Those are problems that are solved, and at least on a country-by-country basis, you know, those standards exist, right? The interesting thing about the blockchain world, from my point of view, is that it's not doing it on a country-by-country basis. It's doing it on kind of a global basis. So in that sense, the value of a standard is even greater than the value of a standard of any specific country. Even though I do think there will still be country-specific standards, like CMAT or others, that relate to the specific laws of that country. And then the other thing that you said many things that are interesting, but one of the things that I really picked up on is that if there isn't a standard and there isn't an assurance that, you know, if I do it this way, then there will be a lot of counterparties that can transact with me as a result of all the effort I put into doing it this way, then the attractiveness of doing it at all is lower, right? Because you would do it some weird way, you know, some special way that, you know, someone cooked up in your team or something, and then you wouldn't have assurances that anyone else would want to deal with you in that way, right? So the lack of the standard, it seems like what it does from your point of view as a consumer of the standard, and in this case the Chainlink digital transfer agency technical standard, is it simplifies this question to a point where you have an assurance that you'll have counterparties that want to deal with you. Does that sound, which is obviously very important from a commercial point of view?
Yeah, to give it an example, right, is, for example, maybe the other side is not ready for stablecoins yet, right? And one side is ready, but we want either side to be able to transact with our tokenized fund, right? And that's where, with the digital transfer agent, for example, you bring a traditional standard, which is the Swift one, but you make it compatible with the blockchain, right? So you still keep that role, and you don't impose, a way of interaction to it. And I think that that's really then unlocking a lot more scale down the road, versus what we have today, where the systems don't work well together. Right? There's still kind of silos in each of their own parts. So I think that's really getting the exciting part now. And we're literally replacing fax standards into bringing into blockchain standards, right? So I think that's what makes it then also really interesting. Once you can deal with the same standard on a blockchain basis, well, I'm sure we're all going to be very creative on how we can bring new utility to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you completely that a standard that does on-chain servicing or processing or something should be capable of dealing with both the on-chain value and the off-chain value, and as well as the off-chain data, right? It should be inclusive of all the ways that the liquidity in the market wants to interact, right? So I completely agree with you on that. So Chuck, from your point of view, how do you view standards and their value?
So this is a super interesting conversation to me, especially so you mentioned a global standard, and then also mentioned that there will be specific or idiosyncratic approaches to that at a national level with the layer of regulation or policy formation that can sit on top of or alongside those standards. And so I think that's where a firm like us can help provide transparency and decision making to establish the benchmark between those with the specific layer over that may come from different jurisdictions to allow stakeholders to make those judgments of, okay, here's a standard, but here's how it's applied in one ecosystem versus another ecosystem based by regulatory frameworks. And us helping provide the benchmarks that enables people to understand the differences and price that. So I think it all kind of hangs together, that we all, here on the stage, we can all have a role in getting to that place where we're enabling the capabilities to be built out and for stakeholders to interact, make decisions with confidence of what the outcomes would be and what the risks they're taking in order to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all these differences will need to be deeply understood by the market. So I think funnily enough, I think there'll be so much initial complexity from all the different chains and all the different things going on that as more value flows on chain, I think if S&P can move quickly enough with your help, which I'm seeing happen, which is great, that it'll actually have an exciting new booming business. It might be one of the big initial booming businesses because we're also in the Chainlink world part of fixing and reducing complexity. And, I can promise you for the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a lot of complexity that needs to get resolved. So I do want to, jump into some of the things we've all done together, which is, I think, timely at the conference and to talk through. So Dan, from your point of view, what is the value of putting corporate actions on chain, and how does that relate to tokenization, accelerating, and what are the things that we've done together to accelerate that, and how do you view that?
I think the cost estimates are somewhere around $10 billion a year spent by financial institutions to process, globally, to process corporate actions. And the problem is, as we described earlier, one system that has to speak to another system, and all parties have to agree. There are a lot of mistakes and errors and value that needs to get pulled back as a result of that interoperability problem in legacy finance. This can be fixed through the use of blockchain and through data standards. And ultimately, this leads to massive cost savings for financial institutions, but also more efficient value for end users. Things like shareholder voting. In the end, you actually don't have your shareholder voting rights in many cases, just because there's so many layers in between that you don't get to practically exercise those rights. But on a on a system where the issuer can come directly to the beneficial end users and can vote in near real time on corporate actions and topics of interest to the company. That's a much more active, dynamic, engaged company and investor core. And so these are all the beginning of the kinds of possibilities that'll get unlocked through standard data formats riding on the perfect rail to express data, which is blockchain.
Lorenz, could you tell us what we've done together in a little bit more detail, and how that's helped move fund tokenization along, and what your experience has been like working with Chainlink?
Yeah, sure, happy to do so. So, well, we really work together on the digital transfer agent standard, right? And how I see it a bit, and I got mixed reviews from that comparison, but it's a bit like a spacesuit for our fund, right? It gives a certain utility where you can do new stuff, right? So we have the fund, we have the availability, we expose the fund onto the blockchain so you can access it economically. But what we really want to do now is bring the whole fund to life on chain and be able to manage it end to end, and then really get the advantages out of that. And I think that's where the DTA standard really comes in, is it brings all these different utility points which have to be standardized to a degree, right? It's around, how do you settle it, right? Or it actually starts first from the initial event, the subscription redemption event. We want to have that standardized and processed in a secure way. And then you have calculations behind, you have possible settlement instruments behind. So I think it really is this nice Swiss knife tool, or in a spacesuit on our fund in the end, right? Which gives these different utilities around there. And then, yeah, I'm very excited to see how it's going to get used, right? And yeah, we're working with a partner, which is our distribution partner, DTCC. And they are already fully on chain, so they're very keen to use a utility like that, right? It fits perfectly into their architecture.
Yeah, I think it's been great working with the GFT and making the first live transactions with you and them over the transfer agency standards. So that's great. And Chuck, we've put on chain the SSA. I got to get this right. Stablecoin
Stability assessment.
You helped me there. I would have gotten it. The stablecoin stability assessment, for a number of tokens, we've put that on chain as the first data from S&P. Could you just tell us what that is, and how we were able to work together to get it on chain?
Right. So we launched this product at the SSA, which measures that risk of stablecoins depegging. So it's not a credit evaluation of ongoing viability and default. It's looking at just a point in time, what's the risk that a stablecoin could be depegged. So we wanted to put that on chain so that our assessments could be integrated into the fabric of new products that are being created, could be integrated into portfolio construction, could be integrated into on-chain structured products that are created that maybe integrate a stablecoin into that structured product. Keeping in mind that at the moment you hit a trigger in a structured product and the stablecoin gets pulled, you need to know if the stablecoin is going to be worth the $1 it's supposed to be worth. So we felt by bringing the stablecoins on chain, we would start to embed our analysis into that next set of capabilities and the build out of the capabilities in the marketplace as a whole. But what I would say is that's just the beginning. We have a lot of hopes and ambitions to bring a much broader sense of our data sets and our analytic outputs and our benchmarks on chain to fulfill that role in digital asset markets similar to what we have in traditional markets. So this is just, in my view, a very exciting start to what will be a big kind of game plan in the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all three of these problems, transfer agency, corporate actions, ratings, and other key, indices and risk data, being on chain and working on chain well is really the start of the formation of a working ecosystem, the formation of a working financial system on chain that goes beyond DeFi, right? Because DeFi doesn't necessarily have these problems, even though interestingly, I think DeFi will be the first big consumer of your stablecoin assessments because they have such large exposure in their markets to the stablecoins of different types. So I can definitely see the risk teams in DeFi even automating, their exposure to different coins against something like your risk assessments, which I think will just be more and more common. But I think we're kind of really at the start of the formation of an ecosystem, right, where corporate actions can be solved, transfer agency can be solved, ratings and risk management can be solved. And that's when I think the institutions will be comfortable coming in, is when these problems that they already have solved in the TradFi world and that they've kind of conditioned their systems and their processes and their product teams and everyone, like, okay, in order for me to do this, I need a rating from S&P. I need to process corporate actions. I need transfer agency. I need these things to work. And my view is that, we're kind of in the process together with you, enabling you folks to essentially consume the service or provide the service in DTCC's case or S&P's case to build this great ecosystem of services and capabilities that's really going to take our industry to the next level. So I'm really, really thrilled and grateful to be working with each of you. I think the services that are going to be provided on chain from your organizations are going to open a new chapter in our industry. And Lorenz, thank you so much for being a consumer of the services, because without your consumption of the services, I don't think anything would be going anywhere. So it's an absolute pleasure to speak with all.
So far, so good.
So that's right. Let's keep it going in that direction for sure. So thank you once again for all the great collaboration and the thoughtful discussion on this panel. It's been a real pleasure as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.